G'day viewers, end of another week. Welcome to Totally Fucked Up Friday. I bring you a roundup of stories from throughout the week, from around the world, that show you the world really is totally fucked up. And I'll start this by saying, yes, I'm wearing a blue shirt. So when I do the chroma keying, I'll probably just end up being a disembodied head and arms. Although maybe the shirt is different enough from the background that the shirt will show up. I offer no apologies. It's a Friday, and if you've been following me on Twitter, you'll know why I offer no apologies. And if you don't follow me on Twitter, you should, because you find out more about what I'm doing. Moving on, this week's TFU Friday, there's a lot of things about the law. What's legal, what's not, what's fucked, what isn't. Let's start with what governments do that might strictly be legal because governments by definition make laws, but is kind of fucked. And a lot of this stuff that's happening around the world, I really just want to point out, and I've done this so many times, but it bears repeating because you don't want to forget this. Governments around the world introduce laws and they'll frame them around, protecting the people against criminals, against this horrible group, against terrorism, against people who are stealing stuff, or against counterfeiting, against intellectual property theft. And a lot of it is just kind of fucked. And across countries, I found this week, for instance, France is introducing some blanket surveillance laws. And France is an interesting country with lots of very liberal traditional views, but practical day-to-day stuff that's honestly quite fascistic. And the latest is they're basically going to write into law the government is allowed to surveil everything. And my problem with that is that these laws, they'll always frame these, we're protecting you against terrorism, we're protecting you against criminals. They can't preemptively protect you or me from terrorists or criminals. They can possibly sometimes after the fact gather information that may convict a criminal or terrorist. And you might say that's not a bad thing, but people being people, and governments and police forces and military are made up of people, and people are flawed. And when people get really broad laws, even unlimited laws about surveillance and gathering information, they tend to simply use it to incriminate their opponents. So my problem with blanket surveillance, my problem with borderline police state security bullshit is that they use it against just individual people, innocent people, but you've crossed their path. They've decided they don't like you. They will fuck you up. They will use guilt by association. They will just say, look, he looks at porn. And they'll fabricate stuff about you. Look at child porn. When governments have these borderline limitless powers, they use them just to quell dissent. And personally, I think that's a bad thing. And there was this one article, links below, about France. It's not limited to them. Canada seems set to introduce laws that conform to the discredited ACTA, the Anti-Counterfeiting Trade Agreement, that it got shot down in the US, but Canada's just gone, let's just fucking put it in anyway. Because you can cite genuine, real cases of counterfeiting of physical goods, of medicines, of intellectual property that are bad, but this law goes way too far. It just fucks everything for everyone, and it's just like very tiny vested interests buying politicians and putting systems in place that for the general populace, they're just utterly fucked up. And you don't want to, and even in Australia, we're fighting ongoing battles. This will sound very familiar to people in the US. If you're a sympathizer to Edward Snowden or the revelations that he's made or that WikiLeaks has publicised, in Australia it's been publicised that the Australian government has been spying on our neighbour to the north, Indonesia, world's most populous Muslim country, our immediate neighbour, and that's caused a bit of friction. And you've got people saying, conservative people saying, oh, the people who published this, which was The Guardian in Australia and the ABC, they shouldn't have done that. Oh, that's against the national interest. Because apparently the national interest means not knowing the truth. Like if your government is spying on neighbouring countries in ways that are certainly illegal and probably immoral, like, oh, you shouldn't know because it shouldn't rock the boat because they should be able... Is it illegal or isn't it? It's just crazy. And what really blows my mind, a guy that I've ripped on regularly over the years, one Andrew Bolt, who said when he's been stopped from inciting racial vilification, when he's been found by a court to be actively inciting vilification of whole groups, he's gone, oh, that's a real infringement of free speech. That's a dark day for Australia. But reporting factual events about our government illegally spying on neighbouring sovereign nations, no, that's bad. Stopping one fuckhead from being a hideous, bigoted cunt and inciting other hideous, bigoted cunts, that's bad. But reporting on governmental abuse of power, you shouldn't do that. Man, some people are seriously fucked. And of course, governments aren't the only criminals. Governments aren't the only people doing dodgy shit. Ordinary, everyday people do dodgy shit and steal stuff. And a really freaky case came up. A truck was stolen that, among other things in it, it had a container of cobalt-60, which is a horrifically radioactive substance and could be used for a dirty bomb. So when this truck carrying cobalt-60 got stolen, people were, oh, it's terrorists. Oh my God, they could make a dirty bomb out of this. It would be awful. Turns out they probably weren't terrorists. They were just car thieves. And this truck, which had a crane on it, was of value to them. And they stole it. The poor bastards then said, what's in this container? And they opened it and it's cobalt-60. And they are probably now going to die. Which probably, this is probably the ultimate. If you can't do the time, don't do the crime. Like, don't steal shit when you don't know what's in there, because you never know when stealing something might get you fucking killed, which seems to be the case in this point. And another really dark crime story I read this week. Okay, look, if you're in the internet, you've probably learned about internet security, and you'll know what a botnet is, when someone through a malware controls a whole network of computers. And you'll probably have heard of how insecure credit cards can be, point of sale systems, even ATMs at bank. People can put card skimmers in. It's like, your personal information, your bank account is at risk. But this week was the first time I heard of a botnet that was built around point of sale terminals. The things you stick your credit cards in when you buy shit. I don't even understand the full implications of this. I'm going to shorten to, this is seriously fucked up. Criminals have now gotten to actually having a botnet of POS machines that are taking credit card details. It's like, if your credit card details haven't been stolen, it's not because you're careful, it's just because you're lucky. Because if you have ever used a credit card, if you have ever used an ATM card, it can be stolen. If it hasn't been, you're just lucky. It just, the world we are in is just fucked on so many levels. And I want to round it out with my least favourite sort of criminal, namely cops. Look, whenever I do a story about cops abusing the law and behaving in horrific ways that hurts the general populace, I always do like to say, look, being a cop is a tough job. We do actually need someone in that role. And it just gets really perverted when it's like, hey, cops, we've got to stick together. Hey, no snitching. Just because one of your comrades is horribly corrupt or maybe a violent, abusive, psychopathic thug, ooh, we've got to stick together. That's when it gets fucked. And there was a case in New York. See, there are so many variants on this. Like, anyone who's ever been involved in any sort of protest, it becomes a bad joke when someone getting arrested by cops. It's not just that you have to put up with being arrested. It's not just that you have to put up with being beaten up by cops. You have to put up with being on the ground, being beaten with truncheons, with cops screaming, "Stop resisting, stop resisting." Because if they can't get you for anything else, they'll charge you with resisting arrest. And that's just fucking surreal 1984 shit. It's like, if they can't justify arresting you and beating the fuck out of you because you committed a crime, they will justify it because you were resisting arrest. Like, well, why were you arresting me? Because you were resisting. But what was I resisting? Being arrested. Why was I being resisted? Why was I being arrested? You were resisting. It just gets really fucking weird. And it went to a new special place in New York this week where a guy was arrested in Times Square. Now, the guy is clearly suffering some fairly severe mental health issues. He was out in traffic. He was shouting. In an interview afterwards, he talked about dead members of his family talking to him, and he was trying to throw himself in front of cars to end it all. The cops, and this is not a unique situation, they decided to shoot at the obviously mentally disturbed individual. That wasn't the end of it. The cops missed the guy they were shooting at, hit bystanders, and they have subsequently charged the mentally disturbed individual with felony assault because they assert it is his fault that the bystanders got shot. Yes, when a mentally disturbed individual is trying to harm themselves and some fucking cop decides the way to deal with an individual like that is to shoot them, and they miss and shoot someone else, that is the fault of the mentally disturbed individual.